Alright, so if you've been paying attention over the past 2 to 3 weeks, the Denuvo game cracking scene has been exploding with activity during this time period. Specifically, things kicked off near the tail end of last year when the MK Dev group came out with a new technique called Hypervisor bypass, and later on a user known as Kirigiri, with the help of various others, was able to use it to great success, where they were able to crack Resident Evil Requiem within 1 hour on release day. Not only getting past the Denuvo DRM, but the 4 other DRM solutions including Steam DRM, Capcom Anti-Tamper, VM Protect, and Steam Stub, which, first of all, is a crazy amount of DRM layers for any game or any piece of software to have, and second, incredibly impressive considering how notoriously difficult Denuvo has been to deal with and how time-consuming the process was traditionally. Now, naturally, I don't encourage piracy, and I'm not just saying that because of the YouTube guidelines against piracy. In this case, for everyone's safety, I'd strongly recommend avoiding any hypervisor bypass cracks, since the potential threats or security concerns are absolutely gigantic and far more serious than a traditional crack spread surface. To help put this in perspective, let's start with going over what a proper Denuvo crack actually is and what the term crack means. A crack is a blanket catch-all term for tools such as keygens, patchers, loaders, or pre-cracked files that allow unauthorized access to the software, or in this case games. For games specifically, recently most of the time the easy of the game is modified and has a full defeat of Denuvo by either removing it entirely or having the DRM logic spoof. This can be something like eliminating all the constant online litany checking, removal of the intertamper routines, or disabling the DRM layers, etc. And as we all likely know, this isn't a simple thing to do. It takes a good chunk of time, knowledge, and elbow grease to do. Now, when there's a proper crack and you choose to run it, the crack software that runs is generally running in Rings 3, or otherwise known as userland or user mode. This is the least privileged level of the Windows operating system, so the application doesn't have access to the hardware directly and can't modify CPU registers, and there's some isolation between the crack software and the rest of your system. Naturally, clever hackers and bad actors can still figure out ways to get malware, like keyloggers, miners, or rootkits on your computer, though Windows Defender and other antivirus software is decent at catching it or cleaning it from your system if you do a full scan or use a better antivirus. So while there's a threat surface, you generally know roughly what can happen and how to detect and clean it if you notice oddities. So now the question is, how is a hypervisor bypass different and why is it more risky? Well, the hypervisor bypass isn't a proper crack technically because it doesn't actually defeat or disable the Denuvo DRM. Instead, it's a DRM bypass via the kernel. When using such a crack, the Denuvo is still active and running on your PC. The hypervisor method modifies your system to look like the original licensed system that the Denuvo key was generated for. In essence, tricking Denuvo, thinking your PC is actually the original owner's PC that the Denuvo key was generated for and hence legitimate. Now, unlike a proper crack that runs in Ring 3 userland, a hypervisor bypass execution level must run at the kernel or hardware level below your Windows operating system, which is Ring 0 or sometimes the Ring's -1. These bypass cracks will have direct access to your hardware and can do pretty much whatever they want. Not to mention, in order to even attempt to run this epic crack, you'll be basically required to disable secure boot, disable driver signature enforcement, and enable CPU virtualization. Use EFI guard plus turning off nearly all the Windows Defender safeguards, which in turn means you're giving the cracked software full kernel-level control over your system and trusting random internet strangers online with full access to your system and hoping they don't break or steal anything they can, or in the absolute worst-case scenario, potentially installing a bootkit on your system. Also, a bootkit is a relatively new term that if you're not in tech, you probably haven't heard of, so I'll explain a bit about that. A bootkit is a highly sophisticated and stealthy form of malware that infects the UEFI firmware on your motherboard, so it could execute malicious code before your operating system even loads. By operating at the pre-boot up stage of your PC, it gains deep, persistent control while completely bypassing any traditional antivirus defenses, often making it incredibly difficult to detect and to remove. Not to mention, and most bad actors won't have their malware trigger immediately, since if someone downloads a bad crack and gets their info stolen, they'll leave a comment and warn other users to avoid it. So the goal of most bad actors is to infect as many systems as they can, but leave the malware inactive and docile until a later point where they'll use it to either install additional malware like rootkits or begin using or selling the various data they managed to collect. This is also partially why UEFI secure boot exists in the first place, since it's meant to ensure only trusted bootloaders can be executed, reducing the risk of these type of bootkit type of infections. Anyways, on to the next question you might have. How would you keep yourself safe if you were to run one of these hypervisor bypass cracks? And the short, disappointing answer is, that's the neat thing. You don't. You could try running these cracks on a spare air-gapped PC, meaning no internet connectivity, and you don't use it for anything sensitive, and it doesn't contain any personal info. Can help reduce the blast radius in the case of malware. But that's still not a particularly great option to most. Also, something else I want to bring up quickly. These hypervisor bypasses are exclusively Windows specific at the time of making this video. There are multiple crack releases floating around claiming to be for Mac and Linux, but that is almost certainly malware. So you Steam Deck users are gonna have to wait. Now, moving away from the technicalities and dangers, while this isn't something anyone should mess around with, and pirate and scene groups aren't exactly happy with all the potential security issues, it absolutely 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt does work. And at the end of the day, a day one bypass is still a game crack that defeated Denuvo during the critical sales window of a game. With how well the technique works, it has resulted in a complete blurks of game cracks over the past 30 days or so, with titles including but not limited to being cracked such as Persona 4 Golden, Hatsune Miku Project Diva Megamix Plus, Sonic Origins, Soul Hackers 2, Avatar's Frontiers of Pandora, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, Persona 3 Reload, Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, Black Myth Mukon, Sonic X Shadow Generations, Montage Wild, Assassin's Creed Shadows, Doom the Dark Ages, Blade Mafia The Old Country, Starlands 4, Sonic Racing Crossworld, Jurassic World Evolution 3, Yakuza Kiwami 3, and Dark Tides, Present Equal Requiem, and Crimson Desert within 2 days of its release. I don't know what Sega did, but man, these crackers have it seriously out for them. In fact, multiple of these cracks came out on the same day. The Nova has gone from being something that takes potentially months to defeat by notable crackers in groups like Emperors and CPY to something that can be dealt with within a few hours, and it was back on track. The Nova has been absolutely gutted with this new technique being out in the wild, but that's not the end of things. Over the past few weeks, the technique has been getting refined. Currently, the Kiri gearing method is on version 4, and all the older, more dangers bypasses are going to be redone and recracked on all the games that have already been cracked so far. With version 4, some of the concerns around turning off all your system security settings plus secure boot are getting addressed slowly, though the risk is still incredibly high. Not to mention, tools are also being built to automate this process as well, and these automated bypass cracks are being to be approved on the various piracy sites. And if all that wasn't bad enough for Denuvo, there's also a cracker called Voices38, which has been on a massive Denuvo crack run and is working on for traditional crack solutions as well for many of these games. So even if the Hypervisor bypass isn't up your alley, normal traditional cracks will be flowing for Denuvo games using 2024 or Denuvo 2025 DRM this year regardless. And on top of all of that, the offline activation method and hubs has been another popular method for quite a while on how to play Denuvo games without even needing to run a crack or bypass solution, which basically means this year has been a doomsday scenario for Denuvo in-game publishers, since it takes a significant amount of time for Denuvo's to update their DRM solutions to try to mitigate these type of bypasses, assuming it is possible at all with their current access level. As once again Denuvo runs in Ring 3, and the extent of what they can do to defeat this technique is highly limited, and any stopgap solutions are likely to be defeated quickly as well. As for the game developers and publisher side of things, all of their games from 2024, 2025, and 2026 are now on the Crackers shopping block, not to mention any new releases scheduled to come out later this year, and now I'm just waiting to be cracked on day 1 or 2 of release at this rate, with Crimson Desert that just came out being a perfect example. Plus there's very little these game publishers and studios can do at this point, since any games they have scheduled to release this year will likely be coming with a version of Denuvo that's weak against these type of bypasses, and they're stuck waiting on Denuvo to figure out a solution first, then ship that solution, and once it's out, they'll have to wait to have the various game studios update their solution and run another round of tests until the game's in a stable enough condition to release, which is in a good position to be in. This has been an incredible turnaround in the Cracker vs. DRM war. While 2025 was sparse with Denuvo defeats, the floodgates are now open with nearly all Denuvo games released, and 2 released being targets now for easy pickings. Going back to the Denuvo technical side further, there might not be a way for them to defeat this method fully, since once again Denuvo runs in ring free, meaning the level of application it has is far lower than the bypasses running in ring -1. In effect, we're potentially looking at a full defeat of the current iteration of the Denuvo solution. Now, while I'm sure many of you hearing this are cheering and glad Denuvo is getting the next question we have to think about is what's next for DRM Solutions and Denuvo at this point. Since these are root mode and kernel level cracks, it's worth considering that Denuvo's next generation DRM will fight this by stooping down to the same level as anti-Shi Solutions and go down towards the kernel level as well. Imagine that for the future, Denuvo kernel level DRM, which is a solution absolutely no one is going to be happy with, not the players for sure, and possibly not even the companies. There's almost a bet if kernel level DRM begins coming with games, it's going to drive a serious wedge in people's willingness to buy and support these companies and games, but that's just largely me speculating and talking out loud on that point. Another glaring issue is if Denuvo and DRM goes down this path, there's going to be a massive problem with the Steam Deck. Well, Denuvo is largely a Windows solution. Linux and the Steam Deck do have some luck with Proton emulating certain titles that contain Denuvo, though unlike Windows, the Linux system doesn't have the same kernel setup and controls, and the Proton emulation layer is enough to work with these kind of kernel level programs, meaning we'll probably be looking at more and more games being locked exclusively to the Windows OS platform. So sad times for all you Steam Deck users out there, regardless of what approach they take exactly in the future. It really does seem like DRM is going to become more invasive and aggressive, and like always, the genuine paying customer will be the one suffering and punished additionally for buying the genuine product, as piracy users will always get their cracks one way or another. Though, on one positive note going forward from here, it's likely a lot of older games with Nova will finally get their removals, since I strongly doubt any company is going to spend 25k USD per month per game that already has a crack floating around at this point. So those of you who purchase some of these older Nova games will have something to look forward to. Anyways, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments. I've been way made to invested following these updates. Anyway, see you next time, and remember, going to Stellar Blade isn't worth destroying your PC over.